is business, never personal.
Here's a 3rd and 7, and McCarron goes down the field, and it's caught and breathes in for the touchdown.
Things in life that's certain. Death, taxes, and 85 will always go.
Who Dey Nation, I am your host, Ace Boogie. Welcome to New Stripe City, our very first episode. And New Stripe City is going to be your new interactive Bengals website where I'll break down anything from Marvin Lewis to Marvin Jones leaving. Whatever you want to hear, it's all going to be here. So with this being my first show, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background and a little bit of my own background, since you may not know me. You may feel like you do, but you really don't. Also, I have a couple segments planned: press coverage, the Prime system breakdown. I know I've spent a lot of time talking about what Prime is, so I'll break that down for you. I also have my draft recap for the Bengals, also with the Prime recap for that as well. So I'll go into that. We'll wrap up the division draft. We'll also look into Bengals Real Talk, another segment that you may have seen from my previous videos, as well as a Twitter poll at the end. So stay tuned at the end, because that Twitter poll is going to be a pretty cool question for, Bengals fans who have been around for the ugly and the good. So check that out. Be sure to stay tuned. But kicking off the show. So, what is New Stripe City? New Stripe City is a show that is going to feature me. It's going to premiere every Tuesday and every Saturday, so be on the lookout for that. I'll be on here from 20 to 30 minutes, just sharing my thoughts on different topics. I'll also have different segments that I'll go through from time to time, so stay tuned for that. So just a little bit about me. Why I decided to do this. Well, I've always felt like I've always had the gift of gab. Every time I go somewhere and I'm talking Bengals or I'm talking about sports, somebody always tells me that, hey, you could be on ESPN, or you should be on the TV talking about sports, breaking them down. I've been told that I just have a natural ability for breaking down sports, so I'm glad that God blessed me with that ability, and I'm able to do what I actually love. I also love the Bengals. I've been a fan since the early 2000s. I was actually at the first game where Corey Dillon got the first win in PBS and broke, I believe at the time it was Walter Payton's single game rushing record. I was at that game against the Bears in Cincinnati. I grew up in Cincinnati, so if you've grown up in Cincinnati, you automatically have an attachment to the Bengals. I felt like I wanted to start this podcast because a lot of the views out there, I love that people have their own views, but I haven't had too many views within the national spotlight that I actually agree with when it comes to the Bengals. It seems like there's like a lack of insight when it comes to our team. I don't know if it's because it's a small market team. I don't know if it's because there are some kind of stereotypes about the team, but I felt that it was my duty to step in and give some real reports and analysis on my team. I also used to previously have a blog called the Realist Sports Blog. It generated a lot of views. It was very popular. At the time, though, it just wasn't the right time and I didn't have the right format. So I've always had an interest in sports and talking about sports, and all of the feedback and positive comments that you guys have sent me through Twitter, through YouTube, it just inspired me to make sure that if I revamp this show, I'm going to revamp this show the right way. So also a little bit about me. You know that I'm from Cincinnati. You know that I was at the Corey Dillon game. You know that I'm a Bengals fan. I'm a diehard Bengals fan. I have an addiction, and I have to admit it, and it's the Cincinnati Bengals. I can't get enough of it. I mean, I'm like Pookie over here in this joint when it comes to anything Bengals. Like anything that comes to my phone, anything that I can find online, anything that I can do myself to preoccupy my time. It's just a bad addiction. So that's another reason. But I originally grew up in Cincinnati. I stayed there for the majority of the 90s to the mid 2000s. I went to Wyoming High School. After that, I actually moved to Florida, so now I live in Florida now, where I attended Florida A&M University, the highest of 7 hills here in Tallahassee, Florida, where I received my bachelor's degree, and then I went on to pursue my MBA, and that's about it right now. I've always, no matter how far I've been away from Cincinnati, I've always had a weird attraction to it, so I always want Skyline Chili, what else, Sister Rashida's, I always want some White Castle. I mean, you name it. I mean, Montgomery, and we know what's up. Frisch's Big Boy, we already know what time it is. So enough about me. Let's get into the first segment of our first show, press coverage. This is going to be a little bit of news and updates from around the league that I'll share with you guys. So our first update is, of course, the extension that Shawn Williams received, 4 years, $19.5 million, $4 million guaranteed. Great signing. We also signed the rookie Westerman as well, the guard that we drafted. And it looks like all rookies aside from William Jackson III and Billings have signed. So just 2 more guys to get signed and we'll be good to go. And OTAs kick off on May 24th, as you know. So it's going to be from the first session for OTAs is 24th to the 26th. So that's going to be an exciting time. I know you guys are pretty much chomping at the bit to see what's going on. I'll definitely have some recaps to talk about that in the future. Our next segment is going to be the Prime Breakdown. So I'm going to go into breaking down what exactly Prime is. Now, Prime started off as a project. Every year I've always been a Bengals draft nerd. I've always looked at draft classes. I've always looked at film on YouTube, broken down prospects. You know, I just marvel over the draft. It's been like this for a while, honestly. I probably say I started looking into draft stuff probably all the way dating back to about 2007. And one of the guys that I actually loved back in the day that we actually got was AJ Green. I was huge on AJ Green. At the time, I stated that AJ Green, when we drafted him, would have the potential to be better than Chad Johnson. And guys laughed at me. I mean, they looked at me like I was crazy. And now, in 2016, it's a debatable, realistic question. So I've always been on the draft. So that brings me back to the part where this year I wanted to do something different. You know, I wanted to incorporate some of my educational skills and experience with certain software to see if I could grasp what exactly the Bengals do and what kind of players they exactly look at. So I compiled some data. I did a lot. It took a lot of time compiling data. Probably about 2 weeks to compile this data. Okay, and then once I did that, I created grades for this system. Now, it was originally known as the Bengals Draft Tendency Predictor. So if you hear me referring to that in my previous videos, Prime is that. Prime was just a name that stuck. It rolls right off the tongue. So it was just an easy decision to make Prime the name for it. So it basically is a Bengals draft board based off of their tendencies and history of what they've done and prospects that they've liked. And it actually turned out to be pretty accurate. So players have a grade and a projected round. But one of the things I didn't account for was injuries that I spoke on in my previous videos because I didn't know that was a metric. And by the time that I pretty much had Prime finished, it was literally not enough time for me to go back through and do that. So next year going into Prime, I'll be stoked and prepared in advance to have that on there. But it was very accurate. You know, it had guys like WJ3, Tyler Boyd, Billings, Westerman. Those were all guys that it accurately predicted that were in that top 5 being considered. Also, guys like Nick Vigil and Cody Core, to some that might have been head scratchers, Prime actually accounted for those guys too. So they were all within the list. All of the players taken were in the list. It was actually pretty interesting going through and taking names off of the board as the draft went along. So moving on, we're going to jump into the draft recap. So as you know, I talked about William Jackson III. I love the pick. William Jackson III is a guy that can play on the outside, that can be a replacement for Dre Kirkpatrick. He's a guy that I was honestly hoping that we would get. I mean, almost about 2 weeks before the draft, I had a feeling that William Jackson III was going to be the pick. Early on in this draft process, I had told my friends on Bengals Real Talk, which is my Facebook group. Join it if you want to. It's on Facebook at Bengals Real Talk. But I told those guys we're going to pick a corner. As much as I want a receiver, as much as I want a defensive tackle, something just told me, and the number said the Bengals are going to pick a corner. Okay, so I broke down all of the corners. Of course, Jalen Ramsey wasn't in our reach. Of course, I didn't. When I looked at the numbers, William Jackson III, was the highest corner in prime for the Bengals. Okay, now there was Mackenzie Alexander who had the same score as him, but his projected round was lower. His projected round was the second round. So William Jackson III was even higher on the prime board over Vernon Hargraves III. And to me, William Jackson III, I felt like could arguably be the best corner in this draft when all is said and done. I like Jalen Ramsey, but to me, he's more of a fit at safety, and his man skills weren't too natural to me. His ball skills and all of that, he pretty much played a lot off of his athleticism. So William Jackson III ended up being the pick, and I couldn't be happier with the pick. That's who I wanted. So looking at William Jackson III and recapping the prime, as you see, and I spoke on this before, Reggie Ragland was the number one guy on the board, but that was only due to us not knowing about his injury right before the draft, which we all found out right before the draft, which was a little bit of a shocker. But I wasn't surprised. The Bengals have only picked a linebacker once in the first round, if I'm not mistaken, in the Marvin Lewis era, and that was Keith Rivers, and he was not that good. He wasn't bad, but he just didn't live up to the hype. He was almost a borderline bust, and he got his jaw broken by Hines Ward, so we're not even going to talk about him. But Ragland was first. William Jackson III came in second with a grade of 4.71 on prime. Jerron Reed came in at third with 4.57. Ashawn Robinson, came in at fourth with 4.57, and Miles Jack at 4.29. Now, to me, Reed and Robinson were pretty much off the board. The Bengals have never picked a defensive tackle in the first round, and one of the interviews that I listened to with Marvin Lewis stated that they knew that this draft was deep at a particular position, with that position being defensive tackle. So those took those two guys off of the board to me. And had I known the Ragland injury factor, that definitely would have pushed WJ3 to the top of the board. But I'm still happy with it because the object of prime is that any of these guys listed on prime can be taken. And the fact that the second guy on the board was taken I was pretty ecstatic about that. I was glad that he lasted that long. So moving to our second round, okay? In the second round, we grabbed my boy. You guys heard my first recap video. You knew who I was big on, Tyler Boyd, and we got him, okay? So during the pick, we look at the prime. We've got Whitehair at number 1. We've got Billings at number 2. We've got Kentrell Brothers at number 3. We got Sean Davis at number 4. We got Boyd at number 5. Now, let me tell you this. While this pick was being made, I was looking and focusing in on wide receiver. That was the talk after round 1 was wide receiver. Who would the Bengals get? Okay, so we started off with we started off with Sterling Shepard and Michael Thomas from The Ohio State University, and Tyler Boyd. I really was a huge fan of Boyd before the draft, just combing through film. The guy was somebody to me, and if you look on my Twitter, I stated it months ago, He was a match for the Bengals. You couldn't have picked a better guy. He wasn't the number one guy in the receiver prime. That was Josh Doxson and Corey Coleman, but they were gone. And right after that, you're looking at a guy like Boyd, who is a guy that can come in immediately, play right away. He came out of a pro style. He can play in the slot. He can play in the outside. He can do whatever you need him to do from day one. He's a guy that's been so productive, not only in college. If you go back to the guy's high school tape and his high school stats, he was productive there. The guy has played everywhere. Quarterback, wide receiver, defensive back. I mean, you name it, Tyler Boyd has played it. And not only has he played it, he's produced at an elite level with garbage quarterbacks. What else do you need from this guy? He played in the ACC. He showed up whenever you needed him to. He could take screens out of the backfield. He could take reverses. He could return kicks. He can run smart routes. He gets separation easily. And it was a no-brainer. After the first two receivers were taken off of the board, the next highest guy on prime was Leonte Carew. But to me, Boyd was just a way more productive receiver and a way better pick for the Bengals. So I loved this pick. I was literally screaming for it to be Tyler Boyd, and I knew that it was going to be Tyler Boyd thanks to prime. So he comes in. Third round. Okay. I'm sitting there. I'm getting nervous. Third round prime. I see Andrew Billings, who's number 1. Kentrell Brothers, who's number 2. Christian Westerman, who's number 3. We have Booker, a running back, at number 4. And we also had Perry, the linebacker from Ohio State, at number 5. I was wondering what the Bengals were going to do here, and they kind of lost me, to be honest. It was a little bit of a moment. Yes. But they ended up picking up Nick Vigil. And Nick Vigil, it was funny, when I was putting prime together, I kept seeing his name come up under a multitude of positions, which might have been one of the key factors in Vigil being selected, because he could play all 3 linebacker spots. He kept coming up in prime under all 3 linebacker spots, the Sam, the middle, as far as the size and the prototypical prospect that they look for at those positions. Another thing I think that may have given him the advantage may have been his special teams accolades and his experience on special teams. So maybe that may have gone in his favor a little bit, but still was a little bit of a surprise pick. Wasn't sure about him. And I really thought that the pick would either be Billings or Brothers, but, they shocked us and they took Vigil, which I'm not upset about because he was still on my prime list. So when people said, who is Nick Vigil, I knew exactly who he was because he was on prime. And as you can see, if you look at my prime linebacker rankings, he was actually number 2 as far as the position of linebackers. We had Kwiatkowski, number 1. Nick Vigil was tied number 2 with Cowser. So not a stretch from the prime, outlook for it. But to me, it was kind of a stretch because even in prime, I had him as a projected 4th to 5th rounder. It was a little too rich for me, but you never know. I thought the same about Tyler Croft, and I was wrong last year. So I'll let this pick play out. So that brings us on to the 4th round, which we all know what happened in the 4th round. We got my boy Andrew Billings. Andrew Billings was the number 1 guy on the board for prime. Came in at a rating of 3.86. Kentrell Brothers is the only guy who came close to him at 2nd. Westerman was on the prime board at number 3. Booker was still on the board as well. And we also had a newcomer in Hawkins to round out that top 5 best available prime. And Andrew Billings, let me tell you about Andrew Billings, guys. When I very first combed through this draft and I went through and looked at prospects, Andrew Billings was a guy that I said was my favorite defensive tackle in this draft, just going off of the film. I'm a huge film guy. I used to play football. We always watched film. That's how you learned. That's how you saw what guys were talented. So I've always been a big proponent of film. And when you watch this guy on film, he just blows you away. I mean, there were big name guys like Shawn Robinson and Jaron Reed and all of these other guys. and Sheldon Rankins, none of them blew me away like Billings did. And the fact that the kid was 19, people need to realize that unless my source is wrong on his age, Billings just turned 20. So you're getting a stud defensive tackle with plenty of athleticism. The guy moves around. He just is a nasty, mean force in that middle. And I could not believe we got this guy in the 4th round. It was ridiculous. We're going to be talking about this for a while. And I figured that it would go down in the 4th round because historically the Bengals usually draft their D tackles in the 3rd to 4th round off average. And Billings was there for the taking. It was the perfect storm with this situation because from what I heard, the Bengals were debating between Billings in the 3rd round and Vigil. And they still got both of their guys. So I couldn't be even happier. I couldn't be mad at that pick at all. So then in the 5th round, the number 1 guy on our prime board again goes Westerman. He had a grade of 4.33. You had Rashard Higgins at number 2, Jalen Mills at number 3, Jeremy Cash at number 4, and Listenby at number 5. So Westerman made sense, and he was a projected 2nd rounder, which when I sorted my column made him the number 1 guy on the board. So it was another no-brainer for that pick with Westerman, and we're getting a tremendous value and a guy that can play center and guard. To me, he provides insurance for not only Kevin Zeitler if he doesn't come back next year, but also Russell Bodine, who we all know has been the weak point of this defense. And I don't care how many times you try to cut it or break it down, he is horrible.
Bruh.
You can't consistently even snap the ball to a quarterback.
Bruh.
We have to do something. We traded up for this guy a couple years ago. He got a cosign from Gio Bernard, and he has not lived up to his potential. If he can turn it around this year, then maybe he saves his job. But if he can't, then you have to start looking at Westerman, and you have to start considering whether he should be replacing Russell Bodine on this line. But we also can't afford to lose Kevin Zeitler, who's been nothing short of a stud. So hopefully we can keep Zeit and we can eventually move Westerman into that role, which I think that they're grooming him to be for. Because every Bengals pick, no matter the value, was always thought of with a year or 2 years ahead in mind. And that's what we'll see. Moving on, that brings us to the 6th round, where the Bengals selected Cody Core, who actually was not on the top prime board just based off of projected round and projected grade. So number 1 was still Jalen Mills, who could have been taken off of the Bengals board just due to his injury problems. I'm not surprised if that was the case. I wouldn't be surprised. We also have Jeremy Cash. Jeremy Cash was a pretty decent safety, but it seems like there may have been some issues with him, not only with the Bengals, but with other teams as well, as he went undrafted. Then we also had one of my favorite guys, Kenny Lawler, which kind of shook me as well, because to me, he was a little bit of a poor man's Marvin Jones, and he could have been a guy that could have came in and contributed. But then we also have Kiaris Garrett and Sharon Peak. These were all guys that Lawler and Peak, I believe, had medical red flags, so that could have been something that had kept them off of the Bengals roster. Also, the competition in the division that they played in college could have been another reason. But if you look at the prime rankings, Lawler came in at number 1, 2 was Garrett, 3 was Peak, 4 was Robinson. We had Mike Thomas, the other Mike Thomas, who people were so huge on, and then we had Cody Core. So Core, I wasn't too mad about either, because he's a guy that played with top line competition. He's a guy that had a lot of athletic ability as far as speed and jumping ability and everything. So he was a guy that I wasn't too mad about the pick at all. I did think that they'd take a chance with Kiaris Garrett, who was the guy that I actually wanted, or Lawler, but I'm not too mad about it. I mean, reading up on Cody Core, he's a guy that had to play in Laquan Treadwell's shadow, so that could be a good thing. Sometimes guys that end up playing in that role end up overlooked, and you've seen it with guys like Jarvis Landry, who played in ODB's shadow as well as or OBJ, excuse me. And you also saw it with James Wright, who's on the Bengals now. He also played in OBJ's shadow, so he could be a guy that could end up being a steal for this draft. The 7th round to me was a little bit of a pick because I just felt that we could have taken that opportunity to grab a guy like Jeremy Cash. Maybe there's something about Jeremy Cash that just didn't fit right, but I wasn't surprised when it was Clayton because he was actually one of the first people that the Bengals met with, so not too shocking there at all. But moving on, we have our next recap, which is Kings of the North, where we're going to recap the draft for the rest of the division. So the Browns had a pretty solid draft. They drafted 5 wide receivers, so there's no telling what that's gonna I guess entail for them. But we all know that they're pretty much 2 to 3 years away from even realistically competing in this division, and that's being nice about it. They had a pretty solid draft. I liked Scooby right at the end. They had some value picks. They picked some of the guys, a lot of the guys that were on the prime board at receiver, like literally a whole bunch of guys they took. So that kind of threw me off a little bit. I like some of the receivers that they got with Rashard Higgins, and they got another guy from UCLA, Jordan Payton, who's also another nice guy. Of course, Corey Coleman. So they had a lot of picks that I did like. They also got the pass rusher, I believe, in the 2nd round, which was a pretty good pick for them. To me, they just had a solid draft. Not mind-blowing, not anything that would concern me as a Bengals fan, but just a pretty decent draft. The Ravens, a lot of people have given the Ravens a high mark for this draft, and I kind of disagree with that. They didn't have a bad draft, but I don't think they had anywhere as near as a draft as all of these people are giving them praise for. They had a pretty decent draft, but to me, they ignored a huge concern for them. Their secondary. I mean, A.J. Green has terrorized them for years, and they're getting these great grades, and they didn't pick anybody that could actually hang with A.J. Green. Just didn't make sense to me. Their biggest weakness last year was their secondary, and they did nothing to really contribute to it. I understand the upgrade with pass rush, and I like the Matt Judon pick, but this was a class that wasn't really deep at defensive end, and there wasn't really a lot of production at defensive end and pass rusher. And to me, there was just more of a wound at the secondary level for them versus the defensive line. They did have some of the picks that I did like, but overall, it wasn't a mind-blowing grade. I'd probably say after the Bengals, they probably had the next best draft overall from a value standpoint and from the names that they put on paper. So I will give them credit in that regards, that they did have some pretty nice players that they did put together, but nowhere as near as these grades that I've been seeing, especially with how they ignored the secondary. Again, I know I keep saying that, but it was pretty bad last year. And then, of course, we had the Pittsburgh Squealers, who made a super reach in the first half. In the first round, excuse me. That was ridiculous. But typical Pittsburgh Steelers draft. They don't typically draft well, honestly. They hit on guys every now and then, but they hit on, like, really good guys. But overall, their draft classes are never really too good. They had a couple reaches in a couple rounds, but typical draft for those guys. Not too much. I would think that the Bengals, honestly, not just from a fan standpoint, easily had the best draft in the division. I mean, if I had to look at some of the picks for the Bengals in assessing grades, William Jackson III was an A+. He should not have been there. He fits a need that we need, immediate, future, whatever, depth need. Tyler Boyd was a great pick. That's another A. I really want to give it an A+, but I'm big on Tyler Boyd, so I don't want to get too wild with it. Number 3, Vigil. That's going to get a bruh grade for me. 4, Billings, A+. To me, Westerman, that's an A. Almost A+. 6 with Cody Core. I'd probably give that a B- to a C+, just given the guys who were there. Same with the 7th round pick. So to me, overall, if I wanted to be real nice about it, I'd probably give the Bengals a solid A. Worst case scenario, pessimistic view, I'd probably say A-. I mean, you can't really hate on this draft. The Browns, I'm probably going to give them a B to a B-, maybe. The Ravens, B+, solid B. It's kind of hard to give them that. The Squealers, they just get a C. I mean, they're not really... They might hit on some of these guys, but Artie Burns to me was a super reach, and they really needed a corner that could come in day one and, do something for him. But to me, they didn't improve through the draft. They still haven't even replacing Martavis Bryant. So I'm giving them a C. They had the worst draft in the division. So moving on, we're going to go into my Bengals Real Talk segment. So I will sit here and rant on a couple of topics. So the first topic that we're going to talk about is this smoke screen that the Pittsburgh Steelers smoke screen the Bengals into picking William Jackson III for Artie Burns. That says it all. Okay, so apparently this article comes out after every other article before that said that the Bengals snatched William Jackson III from the Steelers, that this was all part of the Pittsburgh plan for them to be able to get Artie Burns. Okay, I broke down this draft. Artie Burns, he's not a bad corner. I'm not going to say that he's garbage, but he is not a first-round corner at all in any form, fashion. I don't know where these guys who claimed that he was a low first round, I don't know where they saw that at, because he was not like second round at the highest in my book. So he was a reach, and to me it was expected, because this draft class really wasn't loaded with corners. Honestly, to be honest with you, there were only 2 guys that could come in day one and start, and maybe you might be able to move that to 3, but that would be Jalen Ramsey, Vernon Hargraves, and William Jackson III. Those were the only guys. Everybody else was like nickel corners and project guys, and Artie Burns was one of those guys. So to me, if you had to reach in the first round and grab one of those guys, there's no way that you smoke screened us into that. Number one, the Bengals have never drafted anybody in the Marvin Lewis era out of the University of Miami. Number 2, the University of Miami right now is trash. I don't know what's going on, but it's been a long time since the Hurricanes were actually good. And sad to see, but they are not that good. And then, why would the Bengals even care who the Steelers were going to get? William Jackson III was a corner. We've picked a corner so many times, from Jonathan Joseph to Leon Hall to Darqueze Dennard to Drake Kirkpatrick. I mean, we've even picked one at 24 before, and he came in on a private visit. You had to know that we were going to take him. I'm not mad that we took him from you, but this whole smoke screen stuff is garbage. I don't even want to hear it. You guys get bruh of the day. That's the bruh moment of the day right there. And yeah, the Steelers should just be ashamed of themselves. Just hold your L. Hold your L. Go in your corner and hold it. Okay? Next, Anquan Boldin. So, I've seen his name tossed around a lot in the jungle community, and to me, Anquan Boldin is now let me say this: I have a tremendous amount of respect for Anquan Boldin and what he's done, how good he is, but he is 36 years old. Okay, he is not going to be a long-term solution for this team. He's not going to be the reason that we go to the Super Bowl. Okay, so Anquan Boldin, he's just a problem. I mean, are we really going to cut one of these young guys like a James Wright for Anquan Boldin? No, we're not. We're not going to do it. So just the whole Anquan Boldin thing, it's over. We're not going to sign Anquan Boldin. That's not realistic. I'm just being real. After Brandon LaFell, that was the only guy that we picked that was going to be a veteran guy that was cut that could come in. There's no way we're going for Anquan Boldin. And I mean, I don't think that he's going to be better than Tyler Boyd right now. I might be wrong, but Tyler Boyd is the younger guy. He's a guy that can do a whole lot. Why stunt his growth for a guy that's 36, possibly about to be 37? It's just not. Just doesn't make sense from a football standpoint, from a team standpoint, to bring a guy like Anquan Boldin in. I'm sorry. I'd pass on that. The third debate: Brandon LaFell and Tyler Boyd versus Mo and Marvin. So I've been hearing a lot of people say that Brandon LaFell and Tyler Boyd cannot be better than Mohamed Sanu and Marvin Jones. And I'm sitting back like, really? So we haven't even started OTAs, and that's already been the theme of what's coming out now? Really? Really? Okay. So another thing I called was the fact that the Bengals were going to sign Brandon LaFell. I called it about a month in advance. He fit the typical metrics in prime, and he also fit the other characteristics of being a guy who's played for a good team. Pretty solid veteran. He produced, and he was cut. I mean, but I hear people saying that Brandon LaFell is trash, all because of last year. And I start to question some people's logic and whether they actually ever played football before. And I don't know if we as Bengals fans have a short-term memory and we don't remember when Geno Atkins, the most dominant force in the league, was coming off of an injury and playing hurt, and you couldn't even recognize that was Geno Atkins. Like, there was no difference between him and like Brandon Thompson when he came in. Injuries hurt people's production, people. Like, it hurts. Like, I'm not trying to make an excuse for Brandon LaFell, but number one, the guy didn't play with Tom Brady in the preseason. He didn't play with him in the offseason. By the time that the guy came back in, the season had already started, so there was no time to build chemistry. He's playing with an ankle that he has to plant off of and run routes with. He didn't exactly have a recipe for success when he came back this year. And we always get caught up in the last year. Well, to me, it's more about the last couple of years. And when you look at 2014, Brandon LaFell took his game to another level. I remember him when he was on the Carolina Panthers. I remember that he showed promise, but he dropped a lot of balls. But when he got to the Patriots that first year when Gronk was hurt, that boy took off. He had did a lot of stuff that Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu have never done before. He caught a touchdown in the Super Bowl against the Legion of Boom. I mean, what else do you want? To me, he's a guy that can come in here, and with a year of his ankle being able to rest up, he'll be 100%. And he'll be able to, attend 7-on-7s and develop a rapport with Andy Dalton. And I think if you're counting this guy out, you might be eating your words, just to be honest with you. So to say that he can't equal the production of a Mohamed Sanu, who did nothing last year, and a Marvin Jones, who also was hurt a year before, I think is ridiculous. Like, look at the stats. Like, he might have in 2014 put up better numbers than Marvin Jones. So to say that is just preposterous. And Tyler Boyd, you guys are really going to say two guys that were drafted in the 3rd and 5th round can be better than a guy who was a projected 2nd rounder? Come on now, guys. I mean, when Mo and Marv were coming out of college, they were not heralded as receivers like that, just to be honest with you. And if you look at some of the past receivers that have been taken recently in the 2nd round, you're looking at guys like Allen Robinson and Jarvis Landry. So I think it's a little way too early to say that Tyler Boyd and Brandon LaFell can't potentially supersede those guys. And Marvin Lewis himself said that he thought that we upgraded in that department. So to write those guys off, I'm not there yet. I'd have to see it on film and in the season before I sit around and write something like that. To me, that's ridiculous. We upgraded in an assortment of areas. Brandon LaFell and Tyler Boyd could net us the same or more production at a cheaper price. And you guys know that the Atlanta Falcons are going to immediately regret that Mohamed Sanu signing. He was not worth that. I'm sorry. He's not worth that. I like Sanu. I respect him, but he was not worth that. He was not worth anywhere near that. He had games where he just completely disappeared. You guys forget about 2014. Okay, let's look at LaFell's 2014 and let's look at Mohamed Sanu's 2014. Then let's talk. Oh, well, Brandon LaFell drops balls. Well, did you forget in 2014 how many Sanu dropped? How many games he disappeared from? Okay, then. So before you go ahead and give your projections and your thoughts on certain issues, then let the guys actually play. I'm not saying that I'm going to be right about LaFell and Boyd contributing, but I don't think that Mohamed Sanu and Marvin Jones really had that big of an impact on this offense. When you had guys like A.J. Green and Tyler Eifert, I'm pretty sure that these guys that are coming in this year can do a pretty decent job. So that is my Bengals Real Talk segment for today. And if you guys have any concerns or comments about what I've said, make sure you leave them in the comments field under this video. I will respond. It might take me a little bit of time. You can also shoot me a tweet on my Twitter at AMBA513, and we can talk about it on there. I'm very respectful of everyone's opinions. To me, no one is ever right. So you can have your opinions. I just have mine. All right. So moving on. Our last segment is going to be a Twitter poll. And the Twitter poll question for this show is, who was the better Bengals running back, in your opinion? Was it Cedric Benson or was it Rudy Johnson? Okay, so I'm posting this on my Twitter and I'm leaving it up for you guys to vote on it. But I will give you guys my reaction the next show after we see what these results are. So make sure you stay tuned to the next show and we'll see you back here. But in closing, I'd like to say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being patient. Please make sure that you comment, subscribe, like this video, do whatever you can. And man, hopefully we can get this joint on iTunes and we can make this a continuing thing, because this is something that I really wanted to do, and I wanted to thank you guys for pushing me and for convincing me to upgrade this podcast, man. And this is what I'm gonna do. So with that being said, it's your boy Ace Boogie. It's been a blast, and I will see you on our next episode of New Stripe City.